Yeah, the call of wild's always bringing me home. Call of wild's always bringing me home. Call of wild's always bringing me home.
About 20% of the state's wolf population was killed in just 3 days. An example, really, of how easy it is to kill wolves.
To me, it felt like an assault, a brutal assault on my wolf relative, our wolf relative.
My Ingen was our brother at one time in the history of creation, who we know in English as the wolf.
Really, wolves only need two primary things to survive. They need adequate prey, and they need not to be persecuted by humans.
The theme I keep coming back to so often is, letting the facts that you find tell your story. You'll figure out that 20 years from now, maybe people will read it and realize, maybe he was right.
My Ingen, what happens to them will happen to us.
All right. Well, hello, wild ones. Welcome to another episode of the Find Your Wild podcast. I'm so excited to have filmmaker Rachel Tilseth here with me this evening. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good.
It's kind of cold over here in Wisconsin. It's like we're in the minus now with temperatures like that. And so it's kind of brutally cold getting into the Arctic weather.
Got to throw the heat on, throw the fire on, and get warm.
Yes.
Now, I'm so excited to talk to you tonight a little bit more about your film. I want to get the People and Wolves, A Story of Coexistence, which I've watched a couple of times and think is really powerful. Just, I guess, before we get into the film, do you want to just give people a little bit of a background of like where you come from and how you got started with this path?
Well, I think maybe 20 years ago, I was tracking wolves when I found out they were back in Wisconsin and started tracking them and got into it. And I actually I've always kind of wanted to be a filmmaker, and I contacted like National Geographic, and that was in like 1999, way back when, and, sent him a story, proposed it, and that's when you couldn't do it online. You had to type it out, put it in paper.
Right.
The script, send it off, and then I called them, and they called me, and they said they were interested in it. It was a story about tracking wolves, and they said, but the problem was at this time they were going international, so they didn't have, time. They were focusing on international and not, United States, and so they said, get back to them. But I never did. So that's kind of how I got started with filmmaking. And then I was tracking wolves since 2000, and I got to know a wolf and her pack, and they're amazing animals, and I can tell you more later. But then I when they had a wolf hunt starting, once wolves were delisted, it was really sad because they wanted to hunt them right away. And in Wisconsin, you saw from the movie, they created this law that said when the wolves aren't on the endangered species list, they're going to hunt them. And I was like, no. So I got involved. I formed Wolves of Doulas County, Wisconsin, and that's where I tracked wolves, in Doulas County. So I named it after that, and kind of started working on my blog, on getting awareness. They can also use dogs to track and trail and hunt wolves. And that was another thing I fought. And it was, I worked on that, and then eventually started, I want people to understand there are wolves in Wisconsin. They're not just in Yellowstone. We have them here. We have about 1,000 wolves now. And so my mission was to get people to know that there's wolves in Wisconsin. And so that's kind of how I got into this. I think in 2022 I started working. Manish, the co-producer, him and I got to talk, and I said, let's do a film. He goes, yeah. So we started working on the film, gathering everything. You have to write a story proposal, you have to write a treatment. There's a lot to it, you have to, have all your ducks in a row when you're doing filmmaking. And so then we started doing that. Then we went into production and began filming. And then here we are, and it's for a year now, it's been in the film festival circuit. It's done rather well. The first time it won was in Montreal, up there in Canada, French Quebec. And it was like, wow, they loved it up there, and so, that's when it became real for me, when it started winning awards, when it started getting on the circuit and people started seeing it and appreciating it, because I wanted the story to get out there.
Yeah.
So now we've been doing that for a year, and now we're going to do screenings, and I'm just trying to get out there and do PR and talk with podcasts on Find Your Wild.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I want to say, I think that the story, it makes sense why it did so well, because it really is so well told, the story from beginning to end. And the way that you also go into different factors too. There's the indigenous that have a voice, there's scientists that have a voice, um there's other journalists that have a voice, and I think it's a really well-rounded cast, and how you show all the facts and the science, I think the storytelling is very powerful.
Thank you. When you get up there like that, the opening scene you saw with Edith Leoso, when I was interviewing her, I got goosebumps from that
Yeah.
opening scene, but I don't want to say anything because we don't want to spoil it. But
Right.
I think everybody, the cast, even the ending song with the credits, that's a wolf advocate that I've known for years, wrote that song. He's out in California. He's an electrician.
That's so
And
cool.
he's a drummer, and I didn't even know it, but Joe, he didn't say anything. He kind of disappeared. But over the last year and a half, he had cancer.
Oh,
So I sent him the film when I found that out, and he just helped him immensely to know that it was out there now, and he was real happy. But it's been put together by so many people, the cast, the crew, Jane Goodall,
yeah.
and she's amazing. When I met her in 1999, that's when I wrote to her
Mm,
letters to her home in Africa, and she responded with 3 postcards, and I just about fell over, like, you know,
that's so cool.
she loves wolves and she loves dogs. Her first animal pet was a dog. So and then I said to her, I sent her an email, I'm going to do a film. Would you like to be in it? She said, yes. Like right away answered me. And I was like, oh, wow.
I was going
So
to ask you what it was like to get her on, but you answered so perfectly. It's so cool that it just goes to show also who she is as a person, she just genuinely wants to help, and her point of view is really great as well, and her focus, like one of her quotes was about storytelling and how it can be both good and bad as well, in regards to the wolf, to try to make a new story for them, because a lot of the myths and stories we know about them and the just add to all the misconceptions that are had about wolves.
it's, yeah, that's the major thing, when she talks about, Little Red Riding Hood, all of these stories, that, the big bad wolf. And I think those kind of stories, I taught on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and a lot of those stories weren't necessarily about the animals. Those stories were meant to keep the children in the camp, meant to
Mm,
keep the children safe in the home. And for some reason, they just carried on, and now they make the wolf the bad one. And I can
Right.
tell you, I have, when I was tracking wolves, I wasn't very far away from a wolf. I just all of a sudden stopped because I felt like I was being watched, and I, I turned and there he was, and his body was kind of like lengthwise, and he was looking at me, turned his head to look at me, and somebody said if they're looking at you head on, then you're in trouble. But he was looking, sideways, and
Yeah.
he was weighing, well, who are you and how do I get out of here? And he was leaving himself an escape. But I looked in his eyes and I thought, that's that's a wolf. Wow, And I didn't feel scared at all. I didn't feel threatened by him at all. And he trotted on, took off.
Wow.
And I think there's just so many myths that, are untrue.
Yeah. So many misconceptions too. Like one of the more important topics too that you cover in the film. Obviously, I'll try to relate to the film but not give too much away because I would also like people to watch it because I think that your storytelling is so brilliant. But one of the things that I feel like is pretty important is that a lot of the people that were hunting the wolves, mostly the common factor was that they did it either out of vengeance or novelty because it wasn't um, something that was available. And I think it's important for listeners to know is that this is very much connected to wolves being on the Endangered Species Act.
Yes, and once they got off this, the whole film is kind of like started with in the wolves were delisted in 2021 January, and then they had right away the debate of hunting them because in Wisconsin you have Act 169 that says when the wolves are not on the endangered species list, they shall be hunted. The DNR doesn't even have a choice, and though the DNR runs it, it's a law that says, okay, you
Right.
have to hunt them. So the DNR at that time said, well, let's wait, why don't we wait and do all of this in the fall? Then they got sued by Hunter Nation, fringe hunters. When I talk fringe hunters, I talk about a small minority that are vocal, very loud, and they think the wolf has to be hunted, and those are the ones, not the ethical hunters. Those are the ones that the fringe hunters that are in control of the airwaves, and so they sued the state because they said no, we want to hunt him now. So you're looking at February, you're looking at, they just got delisted, you're looking at February. The thing that I had the worst problem with is as a somebody that tracked wolves for all of these years, I know that in January and February they're beginning their breeding season. So they're very territorial. They're very protective of their territory and of their mate, and they're doing this, and that's when they wanted to hunt them. So they threw together this hunt like you saw in the film. They talk about
Yeah.
it was hastily put together, and they said, okay, we're going to hunt the wolves, and they used dogs to go in there. It lasted like 3 days and they closed it because they went over their quota. And some of these hunters that are the hounders, the Wisconsin Bear Hounders Association, they want to hunt wolves. And so they use their dogs. And that's where I think there's a little bit of revenge there because they run their dogs on bear, and during the certain times of the year, the wolves have their pups in a rendezvous site. And
Yeah.
at that rendezvous site, that's where they leave a babysitter, but these dogs run through that site. So here comes mom and dad and just, rips apart that dog like kills him because you're not supposed to be near our pups. We're going to defend them. So
Right.
there's that dynamic. That's the fight. So a lot of them are kind of like revenge because in the film they talk about that. It's like revenge there. And then there's people, it's a novelty. Oh, I can have a wolf. And a lot of the hunters were bragging about, here's my carpet, in the fireplace. This beautiful animal's now going to be laying in the fireplace as a rug. And yeah, novelty. So that's what
Yeah.
the talks about it. But the film stemmed from that February 2021 21 wolf hunt, and that's where it affected the tribe.
Yeah. That's that was pretty powerful to me, and also that the pretty inherent connection that the tribe has with the, and they call the wolves brother, and in their language it's Meningan, right?
Mayingan.
Mayingan, sorry.
That's okay.
Mayingan.
They,
And the name of the tribe again is called?
well, they're the Anishinaabe people, and if you look at the Great Lakes, it circles around the Great Lakes. They're the Anishinaabe people, the Ojibwe, and they've lived up there for centuries with the wolf, and so those are the people they call him Mayingan, and it's in their creation story. They were together. I'm gonna, I can tell you the story, but they'll do it better,
Right.
and so what they did was in creation, they were by themselves, and then the creator said, "Here, I'll give you the wolf, the Mayingan, as your companion." So there they were, the original Anishinaabe man and the wolf, and they were naming all the animals, and they were working together, and then the creator said, "Well, it's time you went your separate ways," and so they went their separate ways. But he said to him first, he said, whatever happens to one will happen to the other. And so they're tied together. That's their spiritual story, their creation
Yeah.
story. And I feel that should be honored. And like Jane Goodall said, there's a lot of spirituality there and a lot of connection. And I think when you come in with wolf hunting and stuff like that on a people that revere, this animal, the wolf, is that right? They're spiritual, they're
Yeah.
brothers. So
I feel like in multiple ways we can kind of like dissect this too. Is that um you saw the podcast I did with David and Howe about the domestication of wolves to dogs. So I feel like in one aspect, it our dogs are our best friend, and then at the same time, another portion of that is that when we look at wolves in relation to us as ancient hunters, we were so aligned with them on the way that we hunted and how we hunted. It so makes sense that they're told in this creation story about how connected they are, because it actually kind of really shows in ancient history too how connected the wolves and the ancient people were, and our hunting styles were very similar, and we clearly had a very symbiotic relationship with them. It would be lovely to be able to maybe eventually come back to some sort of a symbiotic relationship. But and another part that I feel like we've chatted about in on Instagram a little bit back and forth is just that how sorry, lost my train of thought. But how they're so sentient, the wolves, that they have such a range of emotion just like dogs do. So the similarities are so intertwined between us, dogs, and wolves. I think it's just always such an important thing to highlight. And I think that, like you said, that with these indigenous people, we kind of owe it to them to give them the respect, and to not just have this, oh, because they're there, let's just take, let's just hunt. Like, they're not getting anything out of it. It's not like people who are deer hunting and using every aspect of that deer. Deer are also kind of not sentient like wolves are. They're not social like wolves are, So, I feel like all of those points come up when you told that story for me.
yes, and like Jane Goodall talks about, that the wolf in the film, she makes a point to talk about that they have feelings, that they would definitely miss a pack member. And I just
Yeah.
recently wrote a blog talking about that, and I talked about Kira Cassidy and her example of the Druid pack, and how Triangle and his sister were out, and they ran across the Hoodoo pack. And at that time, they came after him, and what they did was, with my cat, I don't know if you see
He
this
wants to be involved too.
involved too. But so what happened was he knew he had to rescue his sister because they went after his sister. So Triangle, went after them and she took off and ran and he was small, kind of like a smaller wolf, kind of the runt or whatever. But he must have been fast because he turned around and he fought him, and saved his sister and bit them and then took off running and they bit him, but he got away. And that tells me that they're very loyal to their family. I mean, they say pack, but I call them family. I'd rather say family than pack. I'd rather, because I believe that they're sentient beings. They have feelings. One of the things I had happen to me when I was tracking wolves, I named my wolf White Eyes. When I went into her territory, she, I was new to tracking the territory in 2000, and she was new too. So I went in there and I got to know her, and would always, go in and check out her scent. We call the wolves, we call it scat. They're, and posting and all that things that they do. So I was always in there, and I'm sure she figured out who I was. And there were many times where I'd be driving through the area, and I could hear pups, and I could hear her. And in Wisconsin, sometimes they have like maybe 5 animals in the family, and it's maybe 25, you know, mile square territory or whatever. It's not as big as you would find in Yellowstone, and it's woods, so you don't see them. And I'd always howl at the edge of their territory at night, and in the woods, I couldn't see them, but I'd hear this whole pack talking to me, answering me with the puppies. That's why we howled. We wanted to know if there's puppies. So I
Right.
did that a lot. And then one year I was out there on in July night, and I was howling, and I could hear them howling a good mile away. And all of a sudden, the puppies were there by me. Well, what happens was they can't afford to leave a babysitter because they need every pack member to hunt. So the
Right.
puppies are left in some, scrub grasses or whatever, and they're supposed to be quiet, but they responded. And I was taught we do no harm, we get out of there because, I don't want to, cause harm,
Right.
so I'm like, oh my gosh, they're responding. They're so, and I could kind of see them in the moonlight. One was really dark and one was light. So I did call them salt and pepper, and then I left. But the next fall or whenever it was, I went to howl and they wouldn't howl back to me and they wouldn't howl back to me. And I'm like, wonder what happened. Are they? And one time I went out with my son Jacob and I said, well, hear you howl because, they're not responding. I don't know. You go ahead and try. He howled and they responded. So I felt like, is she mad at me? I broke her trust. Those were her puppies. I mean, that's the only way I can think of it.
Right. Huh. Because they also say that each wolf's howl is unique, right? So they probably, I guess, recognize your sound. So that's how they can hear each other is, it's not just a random howl, that each howl is as unique as each of the wolves, and they have clearly their own personalities, like with that wolf that you just talked about from Yellowstone.
I'm
Um,
from Wisconsin. Oh, you
oh,
mean this
the
Wisconsin when I
the
help?
runt, yeah, the runt of
Oh,
the
triangle. Yeah.
yeah triangle. But it clearly just goes to show, like, because Yellowstone has the most, I feel like, detailed wolf stories. Um, you know, that like the lineage and the history is that it's just well documented there, but there are clearly with every wolf, with every family pack, there's clearly a story for each of them. Who knows why they didn't decide to howl back, right?
I
But
know. I tell people that, and I really believe it's because um, her puppies were very important. She didn't trust me anymore because she used to howl all the time. So that's what I think, so,
mhm,
but, you never know. So
never know. Yeah. And do you still track them today?
the film has took a lot of time, and the
Yeah.
wolf hunts and the political end of it takes a lot. So no, I haven't.
Mhm.
But I plan on getting back into it and going up there
Yeah.
and, getting back into it because I miss going up there. It's nothing like, okay, it's like a couple feet of snow and you're
Right.
driving on the road and it's in January and you are looking for signs of wolves and then you see them. It's breeding season. So
Mhm.
it's always on the edge of the territory, and there's always one wolf, pack that is like really scent marking, and it's funny because the whole pack is there, and the
Right.
only ones that can raise their legs are the alpha pair,
Mm. Right.
and so you've got all these little they call squat urinators all around there, and all these tracks, and they're and I tracked one year, and it was amazing because every 10th of a mile there was sign, and I was like, and then at the very end there was the end of the road. It was a mile long. At the end of the road there was this little tiny pine tree about like this sap,
Mhm.
and there was a little bit of snow on it, and then there was a rusty colored urine in it that said the female is in estrus. So it was actually there were, you know, it was just
Wow.
neat to see that and to know it's like when you're tracking wolves, it's amazing because you're kind of like you're an investigator. You're
Right.
figuring out what
Yeah.
thing is. Yeah, so it's amazing when you find that.
Yeah, like it's you got to use whatever kind of clues they're leaving you, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're amazing animals. So
Yeah.
they're
They're definitely they've always been one of my favorites. So, um which is why I think it's so important to protect them. And just to go back to your film again, and what you said before, that there are about right now there are about 1,000 wolves in Wisconsin.
when you track, it's always an estimated number because I say,
Right.
well, the French hunters get really mad and say, well, that's not true and everything. And well, I say, well, you know what? We can't see through trees. We do the best we can. So it's always
Right.
an estimate because when you track, you're not just going in there and counting the tracks. You're watching over that territory of that and figuring out that these how many wolves. Okay, then I don't know if this for sure 5 wolves. Well, I need to make sure that they're not backtracking through the forest and there's only one wolf, and
Right.
then you're measuring tracks and stride of the animal, and you're doing all sorts of things and figuring out where they're going. I mean, what's the direction they're going in, and so there's a real science to it, and
Yeah.
so that's part of it. So
It's clearly not an easy thing to do, so it makes sense that the numbers are not always as probably accurate, and that depends on, I'm sure, what happens on a day-to-day basis, what wolves maybe, you know die or whatever, just in like the natural landscape. One of my favorite quotes actually from the film is, if you see a wolf in the wild, it is a cosmic experience. I'm sure you felt that too with the one wolf that was kind of staring at you too. Um, but saying that it is kind of rare to be able to find them. I was talking to another wildlife photographer, and he's like, yeah, wolves are kind of sometimes the hardest, for me to try to find. So I'm sure it can be tricky to really estimate their numbers too.
and that's what we do in Wisconsin, and then it's a political thing. When you come to the politics of it, it's like if it's an election year, that they might delist them, and then you get some politicians that want to talk about hunting them, and then there's the exaggerations. Oh, the wolf is eating all the cows, and the wolf is. But it's interesting because, I had like somebody contacted me from up north, contacted me and messaged my Facebook and said, we love wolves and we have this little acreage in the woods and we have horses and we know that wolves are there and we really love them, but we don't know what's going on. But all of a sudden we're seeing the wolves come through and stop by our corral. And so we're wondering, and I'm like, oh, let me figure this one out. So I called Carter Niemeyer, and Carter Niemeyer is what I call a tall cowboy tracker, and he's written several books. He was involved in trapping the wolves to bring them from Canada down into Yellowstone into the reintroduction. And so I
Wow.
called him and I said, Carter, this is what's happening. And Carter said to me, message him and ask him what's changed. I said, okay. So I said, okay, what's changed? Well, they got a dog.
Hmm.
So that's something new into the territory of the wolf. So the wolves are leery of the dog.
Hmm.
So we told them to, make a scarecrow with, to kind of scare them off. And you can buy this tape, that you put on your barn, reflective tape, and then it'll
Mhm.
move around to kind of scare them when it blows in the wind. Also, always keep the dog by your side.
Right.
And so that's non-lethal. I mean, you're making sure that if you live in the wolf country, that you make sure you're, doing the right thing. So
Hi, Wild Ones. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Find Your Wild podcast. This episode is brought to you by my clothing brand Femme Sauvage, and I'm going to link that in the description below, along with a little discount code for you. Be sure to check it out. We also donate $5 with each of our animal designs towards specific charities. I will also have those in the description below. And enjoy the rest of the episode. Thanks so much for listening.
so
Right.
that there's so many people out there you can call. I called Carter. Carter, what do you do?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
many people willing to help you find a creative solution
Yeah.
to maybe combating conflict, obviously, with them. Because, I think it's our responsibility that we've taken so much of their land and just their importance in the ecosystem. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, right, in these type of cases is like, how do we educate people? How do we bridge that gap? How do we have them feel with their heart and connect to the wolf and see them as more than just something that's just an animal, a wild animal to be feared, right? And in the movie, I think that one of the scientists name that you have on? I'm sorry, I forgot.
Peter David, and he worked with Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife, there's like 10 tribes that are part of that, and he learned from the elders about animals and wolves. So he learned from the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, the tribes. So he's retired, but he is the biologist. So
Yeah, I thought that a lot of what he was saying was very interesting as well. And obviously, I don't want to like take away from the film, but to prove a point is that, we think of, oh, okay, there's 1,000 wolves. That's a good enough population to be able to hunt them down. But with that, uh, killing that happened, there were how many wolves that they ended up killing within a day?
200 and some. I don't have those exact numbers, but they
Yeah.
wanted to give a quota because you give a quota to the tribes. I think it was something 100 some that the hunters could get, and then the tribe got the rest of them. So they not only took their quota, they started going into the tribe's quota. And they were saying things like, well, don't register them right away. Then they weren't able to close the areas because they weren't registering the right thing. So it was just a disgrace the way they handled that. It was hastily put together, and then those things happened. So
Right.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
devastating for Trenton as well.
Absolutely. And then he talked about how that brought down the whole population 14%. That's a pretty drastic change um in wildlife. I mean, that's a pretty big chunk, if you think about it. So, um and I think that clearly, it shows that there were issues with chronic wasting disease in deer. I know that there are still scientific studies being done about the missing wolves and the relation to chronic wasting disease, but Maybe you can just like talk about that important relationship that wolves have with killing the deer that have this.
Well, there's been no scientific proof of that, but I think that if you took a map and put the map over the state with the wolves, the ones that have it, you wouldn't have it in wolf country as much. You know,
Mhm.
that's what a lot of people have said, but they haven't done any real studies. But I know this, a scientist told me this, and I've always used this as an example. If you think about a wolf trotting in the forest, it's in the snow, and he's heading down there, down his territory, and he comes across the the um the bed where a deer slept, and so what he does is he kind of like puffs on it and brings up all those particles into his beautiful olfactory system, and he can tell if the there's the there's a tick down there, and he can tell it's full of blood, and he can tell if there's pus in that blood of that tick that
Wow.
fell at that deer, and then he's going to go, okay, I'll go for that, I'll hunt that one. They walk through, and they'll smell a leaf where a deer chewed on, and he can tell if they have tooth decay. I mean, it's like they know these things that the dogs are now finding cancer. Dogs are finding cancer in people, and
Right.
so these animals are a wonderful part of, the entire, ecosystem, keeping it healthy. They know what we're doing, where humans are going to go out and, you see these hunters taking the biggest, fattest, male elk with the big rack,
Right.
where deer isn't going to go for that one because that's a healthy deer, and let's keep that deer in the ecosystem, you know,
Right.
because that's going to be make a healthy, deer herd,
Right.
and so I think man could learn a lot, and I think that's an example of the Ojibwe as well. The one that's in the film, he is like president of the Lac du Flambeau tribe, and he was telling me some stories, and I didn't get all of the stories in the film, but I enjoyed the story where he told me that when he takes somebody out on an elk hunt, takes people out there, what they want to do is they take the they cache some of the when they cut the animal and they got it, they take some of that and they bury it, and then they cache it, put leaves over it for the rest of the beings in the forest. And then they're going to stay in the forest. They're not going to come to your house. And I thought, wow, that is very profound.
Yeah.
The
I love
animals.
that.
Yeah,
That's very cool. Yeah.
John
Um,
Senior told me that. I
yeah.
learned a lot.
Yeah. I love the connection that they have in their myths and the connection to the earth. And I think that's also a pretty good thing to highlight is that wolves are going to go after the sick ones. Their biological function is to go after the sick ones. Um, because that's also less risk to them because they don't want to get hurt or hunting ungulates isn't always the easiest thing, right? So um that's a really important thing that clearly wolves have a different hunting strategy than us humans, and that biologic diversity, that strong genetic material is being passed on from the stronger bucks, to help make a healthy population so things like hopefully chronic wasting disease go away, is such an important thing to highlight.
One of the things that I found really important, when I saw my first wolf kill, and there was the deer laying there. Just there was no meat on the bone. It was just laying there full out, and I looked at the skull, and the ribs are up, and there is deer fur in a circle all the way around, and then there is the hide all bunched up laying beside the animal, and I had such a respect for the deer, and I had such a respect for the wolves, and it was just so humbling to see that. And I've referred that story a couple times when I talk about politics and how, we have to remember that, these animals are part of the ecosystem. They're iconic and they're there for a reason. And then when you get into the politics of it all, that's not natural. Politics are not that's that's
Right.
where we and I like what Marvin Defoe said in the film too. It was remarkable how he talked about the universal law and
Right.
that the universal law, because that's you're talking about the universal law, so I like that part.
Right. And also the point that he was making that in his language it was, or I don't know if it's the same gentleman, but the one that said that to hunt an animal is to also, I forget the exact words that he was said, but like that um to kill an animal is also to grieve its loss, to have this ultimate respect for when you do kill an animal and you honor it. And I think that there's this extra factor of disgust with these wolf hunts because it just seems like such a waste and for no reason. Like there is no reason behind that. And a lot of my way of thinking about things too is and I think I especially appreciated that in your film was the spirituality. And I think what sometimes a lot of people out there miss is that, I do think that there's a part of me that thinks that God created this earth to, and we view it as, we're supposed to be the guardians. We know better. Animals are just animals. Like I think that there's also a responsibility that we should have, that we know better, that we should treat everything we come into contact with like, as best as we possibly can. And I think that that's a spiritual quest too. To try to be one with the land and to try to take care of the earth because the earth is our home. And to hopefully bring these conversations forward and to see how important we are all connected, and every animal is important and they're made for a specific reason. Um, and it goes to show. Yeah.
And that's the word natage. And
Yeah.
when I interviewed Michael and he talked about natage and talking about you mourn the death of a person, and then you mourn the death of an animal. And natage, that's the two meanings. The word also means you mourn the death of a person, and then you mourn the death of when you go out and hunt, and that you should not be taking, it's a sacred ceremony, you should not be taking that animal just for sport. You should, honor the animal. And somebody told me it's a long time ago, I don't know who it was, but it was a Native American person and said, every time you see an animal killed on the road, say a prayer, and I think, yeah, I do that automatically now. When I see one, I go, the loss of that animal is just because of us, that life is there and we, took it. So I think there's a lot there. And I think if we started thinking in terms of, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe have lived with wolves for centuries. Their way of living is very respectful because, like they say in the film, that could be their mother, that could be their father, because you don't know, when they used to bury people under a tree. Well, maybe you came back as a deer, You never
Yeah.
know. It's the beings and it's the relatives. And so that's the way they look at it. It's like in the movie, the short film I did, Wolf 813. I'm sure you want to talk about that one too.
I do. Yes.
It's a really, that's a moving one though. Very
Yeah.
spiritual.
Um, yeah, why don't we, because I definitely want to talk about that as well. Why don't you just explain a little bit to people that don't know her story just so they get a little bit of a background on that?
Well, I think around 2014, I was so excited when the Ojibwe tribe, began to monitor her with cameras, and I saw those initial pictures of her in Wisconsin, and it was so cool to see her in her pack and everything, and I always followed them. And then Christmas morning, about 2 in the morning, a I say he's a disgruntled, he wants the population to be 350, and he's a retired warden, and he is wanting a hunt and keeping the wolves down to 350. Well, he shot her out on Christmas morning at 2 in the morning, shot her outside of his house, his door, saying that it was a threat of life. Well, it's still, I don't really want to say anything, but it's still being investigated over a year later. And, it's what's going on. But it turns out you can see the film on, it's 813 More Than a Wolf, and it's on YouTube, and it's about 10 minutes long. So if you want to watch it, but it was very sad because she was old and her teeth were really worn down. And what's amazing was she had like nine litters, generations, 9 generations of puppies. She even took care of a three-legged wolf, and so the Red Cliff tribe had been monitoring her, and story is in there, if you watch it. And so as soon as I heard that, my heart went, there's story. I didn't want to tell the story from us against them and these horrible hunters. I'm a storyteller, so I wanted to go up there and get the story of the people that monitored. So I went up there and met with Ron and Misty Nordine, and and also the biologist that's there, and got the story from them, because I think that's the most impactful way that you can do anything, is to tell the story from the people that knew her. So they tell the
Yeah.
story. And
Yeah.
not July, December 25th now, it's going to be a year, and it's still not resolved. It's being investigated because there were these rumors that he baited the wolves.
Mm.
So I can't, say, and so I don't understand why it's not resolved. So that's another
Still
sad thing.
waiting on that investigation to be finished, but
She
that's
was,
heartbreaking.
she
Yeah.
was, the tribe was part of her family, and they were part of, the other way around. They were a family. Yeah. And so it's another way of, it was so devastating for them with her.
Yeah. And I think for maybe people not understanding the concept of how the the tribes are so connected with them is like, just imagine it from their perspective. This is a collared wolf. They're clearly keeping track on her. And I mean, they're just so involved in where is she going, what is she doing, what are her connections to her family. Like, imagine like you're keeping up with the Joneses. It's like a popular celebrity that passes away, but they're so much more connected with the nature and the beings that are around them. So to them, that's their connection. They're following her story very intimately and connectively. And I think especially these matriarch wolves are so important, and the fact that they're raising the next generation of their young. It's
Yes.
so important, and it's so sad. And a lot of the hunts that happened in Wisconsin, they're shooting pregnant wolves. And I think that's a big story that I've found in a lot of my podcast guests, is that, people just think, oh, they'll just reproduce, they'll reproduce, it's fine. But with animals like carnivores, and especially wolves, it takes a long time, and their whole pups might not survive. It's the survival rate is very hard. So to take out so many of those wolves, I think, is unscientific and irresponsible.
And I think one of the things is, I don't know, I follow compassionate conservation, where it talks about, it's like Born Free. Have you ever seen the movie Elsa the Lion?
My childhood dog was an English Mastiff, and we named her after that movie.
Yeah.
So yes.
So they come up with this compassionate. So one of the components that we should all honor is the individual. So, you can't just say, okay, I'm just going to go and and I just wrote a blog about the fact that this stuck with me for many, many years, that years ago, they were going to, cull an elephant herd. And because they said the elephants needed to be culled because it was a drought and they were causing damage. Well, as it turns out, they discovered that, the elephants are archonic and belong very much in there, and they help all the other animals. So
Right.
they're part of the whole diversity, they enhance it by they've got big feet, so the rain can collect and dew in their footprints, and they can smell water from, 5 miles away, and they can do so many things, and so they got it wrong. So they're thinking, but then you're also thinking about one matriarch learned from another matriarch. So you're going back generation after generation after generation, and that's an individual. And so what you're trying to do is, okay, so you're going to go in and call them. You shoot that one that knows these routes that they take,
Right.
you know, and it's the same thing, like the story of, the individual with, the pack, the runt that saved the sister.
Oh yeah, triangle. Right. Yeah.
Well, and you just think that you cannot do that because these individuals are beings, they have feelings, and that's what, Jane Goodall has learned all of these years. And, one of the things that she's also learned is, our close relatives, the closest relatives, the chimpanzees, are very violent too, and they're related to us. And it's kind of sad, but
Right.
to me, it's not conservation. The old ethics of conservation, the North American model, all talks about, all these things that you have to do, these principles, and there's several of them, but I want them to include the individuals, that individuals matter. And you can't just go in and, kill off, a pack, part of a pack,
Right.
and they do this with coyote hunting too. They hunt them 24/7 all year long. And you think, and then you hear, well, they'll rebound. Like you said, wait a minute. It's not about rebounding. It's about the individual, about
Right.
those animals.
Right. Yeah. And I think to your point is that the individuals, there is no, unless you're following them for a really long time. And if you're following them, you're probably not going to want to kill them anyway. But the
Yeah.
fact of the matter is that you have no idea what knowledge they have,
Yes.
especially with, your example of elephants. They're so matriarchal as well, and the wolves, both of them being keystone species and important to their environment, but also just the fact that their knowledge, each individual's knowledge, is so important. Like the matriarch, you said, 813, she had 9 pups, so she clearly is very successful and knowledgeable, and that knowledge is now lost because she was killed. I think, obviously by a human too early, unreasonably. Yeah.
I just think we have to take a look at the individual. I don't know if you're familiar with Mark Bekoff, and he works with Jane Goodall, and he talks about the animal's behavior and psychology today. He
I don't
talks
know if I'm familiar with him, but I'm definitely interested. So
I'll send
please.
it to you, but he works with them.
Yeah.
He talks about the lives of animals and how they have emotions and, the way they live. And so we need to rethink all of this. We're also on the precipice of this, global warming. We need these animals in place. We need to keep them in, the ecosystems because they're so valuable, and their knowledge and everything. We can't afford to do that anymore. We can't just go in and get, and then another thing, Jane Goodall and all of us were learning more and more about these animals. And, the more we learn, like learning about Triangle and, how he defended his sister, and it's like Peter says in the film, what we know now, we're learning more, and we also shouldn't be justifying and saying, okay, they're going to do this and they're good for this. They have a right to exist. I think they're there.
Right.
We have to, we have to take care of them. And we
Yeah.
can't, and to me, I've done this since 2000, and I've seen that there is just, I don't know, there's a segment of a small amount of fringe hunters that are angry. And like you said in the part of the film where they're hunting over anger and revenge or novelty, we have to be careful and we have to try to educate those individuals. We have to say, look, you've got to think about this, and we've got to change that paradigm where it's not just us against them, it's us with them, where we're here on earth all together. We need to
Yeah.
work on this. We need to do this together because, the small wildernesses that we have with these animals in there, we have to protect those because there's lumbering, there's real estate, there's the gas companies want to get in there, and that's one of the big reasons they want to delist the wolf, because once the wolf is delisted, um, under the endangered species list, it protects their habitat. So
Right.
if you delist them, then all these entities, these companies can come in, and just cut down trees and do whatever they want. But we need to safeguard that with the Endangered Species Act. And that's kind of under the gun right now too. They're trying to,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's important. And I think that also just that something that I feel like people can hopefully take away from this is that storytelling is so important, and using that to, because we really want people to hear us, right? We want them to be able to absorb the information, to be able to change. um and I think that also a lot of the themes in some of my podcast conversations have been that this may be a fix, or like some people may think of, okay, well, right now it's fine, but people need to understand the intrinsic connection that wolves and deer have, because okay, maybe you're taking all the wolves out now, but, and obviously again, there aren't any scientific studies right now about the chronic wasting disease, but there may become a day when there are no deer left because they're all diseased, and because all the wolves have been overculled. So I think that that's a really important sentiment for people to realize is, okay, maybe those things can be happening right now. You're doing those things, like you may think that, oh, there's so many wolves, but um I don't think that that's sustainable for the future. And I think that people need to realize that by doing that, you want to leave a damaged earth to your children, your grandchildren. Like, if you love your children, you should love the earth and care for other animals, so that, because those animals are specifically made, that's what they're, Mother Nature bred them for, made them for, like how Earth created animals or however that happened. But they're here for a specific reason, and there's no one better for that job than, say, a wolf or whatever. So, and I think through points in this podcast that we've talked about, with their sense, and like that they can recognize sick deer over healthy deer, because they're not going to take that risk because they have to go back to their families. So, just
There's
to,
also, there's
yeah.
also farming is, I just listened to public radio, and there was a husband and wife farmers that were talking, and that's another component that should be addressed and looked at. They talked about how they made sure that on their farm that they had corridors where the animals could go through, and they had ponds in the corridor. They also talked about they had chickens, and so they put the chickens in a area, specific area to lay their eggs, and then they also had protections around them, like to keep the hawks and that away. And but they didn't want to harm any animals, but they had that in place. But they understood that they have a farm there and that there's other animals, and they said one of the things was, yeah, they do want to keep the fox away, yes, from the hen house, but they also realize the fox is good to keep the mice away, and all these
Right.
little, I thought, wow, to have this little corridor where geese and ducks can come in and other animals can go through. that's where farming, we need to be a little closer to the land as we farm. I thought, because you talk about, mitigating problems between, wolves and livestock. And that's one of the big problems when you have, predators, iconic predators in a area is
Right. Yeah.
livestock, you know.
That is one of the bigger issues as well. And um I think one of the film there was a documentary I watched recently about the Florida panther. And it's funny how there is a guy who also owns farmland, and there it's it's so intrinsically connected to the Florida panther because they're trying to protect farmland, which is kind of also the only wild spaces left beyond that as well, to help protect them. So it's kind of coming full circle, at least in Florida, where we're seeing this. Oh, actually, we do have. We are on the same side now. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to think about all of these things. So you're thinking about, one of the biggest thing is like there is the land carrying capacity when you look at a wolf population. Can the land hold the population? Then you look at the social carrying capacity. Can people tolerate the wolves? You know,
Right.
because people like, people with this one lady I talked with up north many years ago, she said that, she could hear wolves. She loved wolves. They were living in Minneapolis, but they had a cabin in the North Woods. So they'd be up in the woods, and she took her dogs for a walk one day, and all of a sudden she stopped cold because the dogs stopped. And dogs looked, and there were the wolf pack staring at her
Oh,
with her two dogs, and she slowly grabbed him like this and pulled him back,
yeah.
just went out of there and went back and told her husband, oh my God, there was the wolf pack. But the wolf pack knew her in that territory, knew those dogs, and didn't attack, obviously. So there's nothing
Wow.
to say. I mean, she would howl to them. And so, I mean, Mickey, her name was, she wrote a little piece on my blog for it. And she was just so excited,
Yeah. That's
'cause-
cool because again, it kind of goes to show that I feel like again, there, like you said in the film, we're gonna know more about wolves in 20 years from now. I'm excited to maybe hear more about the studies of like them recognizing different howls too. Um, that would be pretty cool. To highlight that because they're so unique to each one.
biologist or somebody told me one time, don't you know your neighborhood? Don't
Right.
you know your stories? Don't you know everybody is in your neighborhood? So do the wolves. I was like, I never thought of that, but yeah, that
Right.
total sense. They do know their territory. So
Yeah, it's important for their livelihood, their survival, and also we can really relate to that because I mean we're gonna know our area really well where we live, right? Our stores, our what's around us. That's how we get around,
yeah,
um, navigate our own paths in life, how we go to work, how we pick up food. So that makes sense.
their territory. So it's like we have to figure out a way to, like I said, that I can't say it enough that we should learn from the tribes because they've lived with with the wolves for centuries and they understand them. And, I can remember reading a book where Dick Thiel, who was one of the first people that went up every winter and tracked the wolves, found that they were establishing territories. And a long story short was he went in and said, okay, you got to give me a desk now because we do have wolves here and now the endangered species now. So you got to, so, and he wrote a book and he did some studies about how when the trappers would first come down through Wisconsin, and stories of how they didn't have any food, but they just chased the wolves off and ate, what they killed. And
Yeah.
then and how there were times when a trapper was carrying a bunch of ducks over his shoulder, and he had even grabbed one of the puppies to keep, from the wolf puppy, and he was, walking along, and the wolf wasn't interested that he had the puppy. It wanted the to snatch the ducks off his back, not him. So there's
Huh.
so many stories of wolves and people, that's why it's called People and Wolves. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I guess that's
Yeah.
why it's called, yeah.
People and wolves. And that's why it makes sense.
Yeah. There's just so many stories out there. It's, I think, and we have to get off of our devices and go out there.
And go find your wild out in nature, you know? Um,
When we
that's
get some snow, I'll have you come up here. I'll take you tracking.
oh, that'd be I'm there in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Next flight. Tell me when it starts snowing and we'll go together. I would love that. And like just for people listening, like what would what's like something that you would like them to hopefully take away from your film after watching it? I mean, I know a lot of it's pretty obvious, but like as the filmmaker, what would you hope for?
Well, that it tells the story of people and wolves.
Right.
That's the biggest thing is, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe have lived with them for centuries. They have all this knowledge and we need to listen to them, and listen to their stories. And some of the biologists talk and Patrick Durkin is in the film and he's a hunter and he's very, very much an ethical hunter and it's just we can learn from each other. So that's what I want people to take away from the film. And eventually it's just come off of its, film festival circuit and we're working on, getting some more screenings up there and getting it out there and getting it on DVDs. So if you go to my Wolves of Douglas County, Wisconsin.com, or go to Instagram under Rachel Tilseth filmmaker, I think I'm under. I don't know for sure, but
I'm going to make sure to link all this stuff
yeah,
as well.
there's
Yeah.
a poster that was designed by a local artist professor, art professor, and he did the work. So it's a film coming from the heart. A lot of people worked on it, and so I guess
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to know. And
Yeah, I think for me too, it definitely comes off as a film of love and it's a 30-minute film, but I think it's so focused and like each minute, each point, each person talking really hits home all of the facts that like we kind of like talked about today and like how we connect with wolves and like with our heart and their importance and how we need to stick up and protect them, because it just right now to me it seems unbalanced and I think that's what a lot of nature lovers and especially animal lovers feel is that it's very unbalanced.
yeah, the wolf, it seems to be, it's like either, they don't want to touch a hair on his head or they want to shoot him. I mean, he's either loved or he's hated, and we have to find that balance that he's an iconic predator. He's an iconic species, and we need him, and we need him. I mean, we put a bounty on his head in Wisconsin and killed them off, and now we've brought them back. And we owe them a lot more than having a wolf hunt that is, just you should shoot them and kill them because that's not really conservation with a wolf
Right.
pack. They're individuals. There's so much. And Jane Goodall, she she knows all of this. So yeah.
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 And I think that also the thing that I think also is realistically that needs to be highlighted to in order to change this is that law that if the wolves are not on the endangered species list, then there must be a wolf hunt every year in Wisconsin, right?
Right. So once they're delisted, they can hunt them. But the DNR has come up with a new plan, and they it spent a couple years working on it, and they came up with many stakeholders, the tribes, hunters, people, organizations, educational organizations, and put it together and talking about that, it has to be about education, it has to be about mitigating problems between livestock, mitigating problems between people, and all of these things go in there, and it's the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources in Wisconsin, and you can go to the wolf management plan there and you can learn more about it. But we want to take care of that law and get rid of that law because it's like ridiculous.
Yeah, and it seems very unsustainable as well. So I just wanted to highlight that kind of towards the end of this podcast, because I think that's the biggest takeaway, is in order to change and to hopefully make a better future for our Meningen. Is that how you say it?
Mayingen.
Meingen.
Well, you've
Is
got
to change this law, and what you talked about, that seems fair. You know, it seems like it's taking everybody's viewpoints into into account to hopefully make something that is safe for everybody, including the wolves in their future.
I think so.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for being here. And I think that we talked about so many important things. And I love wolves, and I hope that people see your film. I'm going to link it down below, and hopefully we could do a screening at some point for people listening that want to view this really powerful film. I highly recommend it, and I think it's really important to get people's eyes on it as well. So
It was
thank you so much, Wild Ones, for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you.
Revel in the moment like a river flowing to the sea. I feel the energy of life force flowing all through me.